Remember when I uploaded my announcement video for this series a year ago? And almost another year since editing and getting this video up on my channel, because I'm a mess. Hi ho, and so it goes. I'm Morgan, and this is the first episode, finally, of my recurring series, Vonnelogues. If you're new to my channel, you might not know that I have quite the fondness and admiration for the author, Kurt Vonnegut. I really adore his works, and around this time last year, decided I wanted to start a project with my booktube channel where I read all of Kurt's works in publication order and discussed them at length. I announced it, I read the first book, I took extensive notes, and then I just never filmed that video talking about Kurt's first novel. Here we are. So I'm going to be discussing, finally, Kurt Vonnegut's introductory novel, which of course was Player Piano. Though this was his first novel, this isn't the first thing that Kurt Vonnegut ever wrote. Prior to Player Piano being published, he published a lot of short stories in literary journals and magazines, but today we are going to be talking about Player Piano. Disclaimer, this is not going to be a book review where I talk about like my in-depth thoughts. This is going to be more so talking about the plot of the novel and some facts that I learned along the way about the book and about the writing process. It's going to be a lot less about like how I felt about it. I really enjoyed it. It was a great Vonnegut book, but I feel that way about all of Vonnegut. So another little like tidbit, I did get some information about the book from like doing some online research, but the bulk of my Vonnegut research, aside from reading the actual book, was listening to the correlating episode of the podcast Vonneguys. I love this podcast. It's definitely a really good way to go about hearing other takes on Kurt Vonnegut aside from your own, especially coming from me because I am reading most of these books for the very first time. The only book of Kurt Vonnegut's that I have read prior to starting this series is Slaughterhouse-Five. The hosts of the podcast, I can't remember their fucking names. I'll put them right here on the screen. Hi, hey. They are more seasoned Vonnegut aficionados, and they know a lot about Vonnegut's life, and hearing their takes on it and their opinions and their analysis of this book was really phenomenal. And throughout my duration of reading Vonnegut's works, I'm going to be listening to the correlating podcast episodes. Hi, that's Player Piano. That way you can see the cover, because it's actually going to be the first thing I talk about is the cover of this book. All of these dial press editions that I am working on collecting, all of the type of the title as well as the illustration on the cover were designed and drawn by Kurt Vonnegut. Kurt Vonnegut was some form of artist and he designed all of these covers, and I can't wait to talk about each of them in their own regard. This one, I love the purple cover with the orange font. Every spine of a Kurt Vonnegut book in these editions is written in his handwriting with the standard classic asterisk, which we'll find out in later books is an asshole. And of course on the back we have Kurt Vonnegut's beautiful self-portrait. So we are going to dive into Player Piano. Like I said, this is an analysis from someone who has read this book for the first time and only that one time. So if you're wanting a more like in-depth analysis from someone who has read this book and picked it apart like dozens of times, numerous times, the Vonneguys podcast is a good place to go. Everything I say is not like true or factual, it's just my interpretation of this book. Art is open to interpretation. These will be like pretty spoilery analysis of his books. I'm gonna go pretty in-depth about the book itself. If you don't want to be spoiled for a book that came out in 1952, probably don't watch it. Though this was Kurt Vonnegut's first official novel, it was published in 1952, this was not his first attempt at writing a book. He had another idea for a book where he wanted to write about Ice 9 after talking to some scientists at General Electric, but many attempts later, many failed attempts later, he just decided to scrap it for a while, put it down, and wrote Player Piano, which was very autobiographical in regards to his experience working at General Electric. And 10 years and a few novels later, he picked that Ice 9 idea back up, and that is what became of Cat's Cradle. This wasn't Kurt's first attempt at writing a novel, but it is the first novel that he's published, and it didn't perform super well. It was met with like pretty pleasant reviews, but a lot of people just compared it to Brave New World in 1984. This is, from what I've gathered from other reviews that I've read and from hearing the guys in Vonnegues talk about his future works, this is definitely the least present of his voice and his narration style. This definitely doesn't feel the same as Slaughterhouse-Five, which is the only other book I can compare it to in his publication history. You can definitely tell that he was still trying to find his voice in a novelized format with this book. So what is Player Piano all about? It follows this fully automated society after a war and a second industrial revolution has occurred, and it follows our main character, Paul Proteus, who is the manager of the Ilium Works in Ilium, New York, which is highly referential to General Electric in Schenectady, New York, which Kurt Vonnegut worked at, as did his brother Bernard Vonnegut. Bernard Vonnegut actually helped discover cloud seeding. In this world, it is fully automated, and the theme of this book truly is about like the horrors of automation from the perspective of someone in the 1950s. It's really crazy how Vonnegut's works have transcended, because the things that he is talking about now are very reminiscent and very much a reminder of what this world has become and how much has changed from 1952 to now and how much hasn't changed from 1952 till now. In this futuristic society, you are either a manager or an engineer, or both. You have like a doctorate and a degree. If you aren't able to do something as well as a machine, you go into the army or the reclamation corps, or you are just like living off of government funding and living across the river, which is the case for a lot of society in this book. They live across the river from the Ilium Works, and they live basically in poverty, but not really, because in this world, after the war and after things have become fully automated, there's no mass starvation, there's no mass murder, there's no mass like torturing or trauma. Everyone has a home over their heads and are fed and are taken care of. This book really dives into the idea of, is society really worth living in if you're not working for what you have, which is a inner dialogue that Paul Proteus has a lot in this book. It actually happens very early on. On page 7, really the world building kicks off really early in this book. Like, here is where you start learning about this world and about how everything is different. So on page 7, it talks about how the world is rid of mass murder, mass starvation, mass imprisonment even, and then it talks more about Paul, and the line is, Paul wished he had gone to the front and heard the senseless tumult and thunder, and seen the wounded and dead, and maybe got a piece of shrapnel through his leg. Maybe he'd be able to understand then how good everything now was by comparison, to see what seems so clear to others, that what he was doing, had done, and would do as a manager and engineer was vital, above reproach, and had in fact brought on a golden age. So from the start of this book, Paul is contemplating whether what he's doing is right, and though everyone is telling him that what he's doing is good and worthwhile and mattering, he doesn't feel that way, because he has this sense of longing for what was before, to be able to compare what truly is better. And that is a dialogue that continues to happen throughout this book, is Paul continuing to question, is a fully automated society worth it if people aren't able to work for what they have? And he's constantly told by his colleagues and his wife, his horrific wife, Anita, that he is doing something good and that he is worth feeling good about. And he is even up for this promotion to go to Pittsburgh to take a manager job of the works in Pittsburgh, and a lot of the book is contemplating whether he wants to do that or not. And his second in command, Lawson Shepherd, who is this really upstanding man, an upstanding member of Ilium, and who does everything by the book and who thinks that what is happening is right and good, should have that job, and he feels super humiliated to come second to someone who is so, as he feels, undeserving, and someone who doesn't understand what the work they're doing is doing. And that's like a full dialogue and discourse that happens throughout this book, is Paul longs for a more worthwhile way of living, and Paul longs for a world where he gets to work for what he has, much so to the point where later in this book he ends up buying a farmhouse that is full manual, has no sense of automation to it, and has this like caretaker Haycox living on the property. And Paul buys this farmhouse, lets Haycox live there, and wants to learn to live off the land and wants to learn to do something for himself and to do something without the idea of full automation. You learn this really quickly when Paul, the most richest and like esteemed man in Ilium, New York, is driving this super beat up old ass Plymouth everywhere and could easily buy a new car or like hire a driver to drive him around, and he doesn't because he wants to feel like he has something of like worth and notoriety. Paul has this sense of adoration and this idea of primitive things being charming. So like manual society prior to this golden age being charming and endearing almost, and he wants to feel endeared. Paul's father was also a manager from what I recall, and I feel like there is a lot of autobiographical tendencies in the way that Paul wants to feel like his father. There's note of that on page 63. So for autobiographical tendencies, like Kurt Vonnegut's father basically built the city of Indianapolis from the ground up, and that's kind of how Paul's father is reminisced upon. And there's this quote on page 63 of Player Piano where it says, "When Paul thought about his effortless rise in the hierarchy, he sometimes, as now, felt sheepish, like a charlatan. He could handle his assignments all right, but he didn't have what his father had, what Kroner had, what Shepard had, what so many had, the sense of spiritual importance in what they were doing, the ability to be moved emotionally, almost like a lover, by the great omnipresent and omniscient spook, the corporate personality. In short, Paul missed what made his father aggressive and great, the capacity to really give a damn." How Paul feels about Ilium and about the works and about everything in this context, it feels very autobiographical to how Kurt Vonnegut felt when he was working at General Electric and in regards to his brother Bernard and his father. Even so, to the point where there's a team building retreat in Player Piano called The Meadows, where everyone goes and there's like 4 color-coded teams and they compete in a bunch of different physical activities to see like which one is the better, and it's a bunch of like physical activities and games and networking within the company. And from what I heard in the podcast about this, General Electric had a very similar team building, like pro General Electric like propaganda called Team GE or Team General Electric, something along those lines. And I think that Vonnegut continues to write a bunch of his life and insert himself in his books, and it starts as early as Player Piano. Even so, like the Ghost Shirt Society is referential to a group, I can't remember what they're called, that Vonnegut wanted to write his thesis about when he was in school for his master's at the University of Chicago, which brought about this book because of him working on his thesis at the University of Chicago and being like denied for what he wanted to write about. And he was like, well, fine, I'll just like make a fictionalized version and put it in a novel. And he did. All in all, this book is just a huge comment on society, because even the foreword of this book says this is not a book about what is but what could be. Even from the very beginning, Kurt Vonnegut is trying to instill this like dystopian fear in this fully automated society, and this is one of Kurt Vonnegut's only books that reads like dystopian. I think he saw the success of books like Brave New World in 1984, and I felt this way before I listened to the Vonneguys podcast, but after that I was like, oh my god, most certainly. He has a lot of dystopian, like what would it be like if moments in this, but the stakes aren't very high in this one to mirror what is said in that podcast. I know I keep referencing it, but it was such a good reference point for my thoughts, and then to go and listen to that, like it was just really, really great. Nothing is too dangerous in this book. Like I said earlier, there's no mass imprisonment, there's no starvation or homelessness, like that's not a thing. Like even the disaffected, like citizens who can't do shit better than a machine and who are all replaced still have homes and roofs over their head. And it's just really fun to see that this is Kurt Vonnegut's like beginning. He was pretty skeptical of his own voice and he was very much laying it on pretty thin, but once the books progress, we all know that his he lays it on a lot thicker. I think it's a really great introductory novel. I think that even though it's not like his strongest and it's not his most popular and it's definitely not his best from a critic standpoint and from just like reviewers and from general like writing, I think that this still has so much Vonnegut in it, and it still rings true, and it's still transcendent, and it's still an enjoyable novel so many years later after its publication. Some things I wanted to talk about for sure is I hope this gets better as the books progress, but man, Vonnegut did not write women nicely in this book. There are 3 female characters that play any sort of notoriety. There's Anita, which is Paul's wife, and she is manipulative and awful and cheats on Paul and leaves him at like a time of need, and Paul like bears his soul to her. A moment I remember in this book so vividly that like broke my heart and made me so exceptionally sad, and a moment that is truly like I believe Paul's breaking point. So Paul buys this farmhouse as a big fuck you to the Ilium Works and like is his secret project, and he's so proud of himself and he's like, oh man, I really got him good. I really got this secret farmhouse that's never going to be automated. And in the contract of the lease it says that like the house must stay as it is. The realtor tells him this and is like, are you sure? And Paul's like, oh, it's perfect. Paul plans this beautiful date for Anita and takes her here and shows her this house and tells her like, this is for us. And Anita starts pointing out how everything is so charming and beautiful and whimsical and how Paul is such a smart man, and he thinks for a moment, and you as a reader for a moment think like, oh my god, Anita is going to throw away this life of automation and is going to run away with Paul, and it's going to be like him and her like back to back, like against the world, and fuck all the norms that have been imposed and all these constructions that we've had to endure. Let's live off this land. She starts pointing out things in the house and says, wouldn't this look gorgeous in the front room? And Paul says, well, we don't have this house doesn't have a front room. And she says, no, sweetie, our front room. And she talks about ways of how they're going to move things from this house into their other house, or how to fully automate this home. And you slowly see Paul like truly begin to break, and when he tries to tell her that that is not like the plan or the intention with this house, she's like, oh, you're joking. It really is the moment I feel that Paul has that whole turning point of like, it's just me. It continues throughout the book, like when you find out that Anita has left Paul for Lawson Shepherd. It's another reminiscence of like, oh, she went for Lawson Shepherd because he's like this upstanding man and he believes that the society works, and if it works, don't fix it. Like if it ain't broke, don't fix it, you know? The second female character in this book is Catherine, which is this doting, overly emotional, very stereotypical 1950s woman secretary. There's literally a scene where she starts to cry and Paul just like disappears into his office. And then the third female character that has any sort of page presence is a prostitute. So you get Paul Proteus's story throughout the book, and then you also get this side story about the Shah of Bratpur who is visiting the Ilium Works, and basically it's to show like how an outsider from another country views this automated society. Like that was the only plot point for the Shah, and it's really silly. And at one point him and his like concierge basically pick up or I guess tour guide, not a concierge, pick up a prostitute, and they're like, oh, you know that he's using you for sex, right? And she goes, yeah, well, my husband tried to write this novel and it didn't really work well, so now we have no food and no way to feed ourselves or take care of our homes, so here I am. Was that Kurt's way of saying, I hope this book does well so my wife doesn't have to go into sex work? Maybe. The representation of women is definitely problematic in this book, but I know that's not really a thing that continues throughout Vonnegut's works. There's like also undertones of racism and still wanting superiority even in the society. So there's a scene where a Filipino waiter says something and there's a comment about, oh, they thought about, you know, replacing them with robots, but they decided no. They still wanted to feel some sense of superiority over other humans, and I think that is why all of the people who are like basically like degenerates and can't do anything because they're not better than a machine, they don't have a college education, are sent across the river and outcasts. And that's just a dialogue that continues throughout the book. All in all, I think this book is a really great introduction to Vonnegut. I think that it is a fun romp. I think that reading it in 2019, like, you can definitely see, like, the lens of, like, horror that he was trying to create, because at the end of the book, at the end of this uproarious revolution that fails miserably, at the end there's like this soda machine, this like soda machine for this soda that is like critically hated throughout Ilium. Like, nobody likes it. It's for this orange soda, and they notice that like the light is kind of flickering, and all these people like crowd around each other and start tinkering with it because everyone is basically an engineer, and they bring it back to life. Revolutionists, the Ghost Shirt Society, and Paul realize there will always be a want for automation. There will always be a want for the society to take care of itself. It's a funny dichotomy to see like what Vonnegut wanted us to be scared of and what he felt was like a horror story, like a horror dystopian of like, oh no, a checker playing robot, ah! The Checker Charlie scene is one of my favorites in the entire book, I must say. And like the supercomputer epic hack, which makes recurring appearances in future Vonnegut works, or even past Vonnegut works. Kurt Vonnegut posed the question of, are we worried about being replaced by machines because it's machines doing it, or are we worried about it because we don't want to feel replaced and we feel the most worthy when we're in a position of work and when we're able to do something for like society. That's basically my little video about Player Piano by Kurt Vonnegut. I hope you enjoyed this. It'll definitely be much more in-depth moving forward because I'm going to be more topical about these and take better notes and upload and film pretty soon after reading the books and not after like a year of reading the book, because I haven't read anything since Player Piano because I said I'm not gonna read the next one until I get the video up, and I fucked up bad. This is the first episode of Vonnelogues. I am so happy to be bringing this to my channel. Like, I don't think it's gonna be one that is super groundbreaking and popular because I'm sure not everybody is as gung-ho about Vonnegut as I am, but that's like perfectly fine. I'm wanting to do this like monthly, so next month we will be discussing, or I will be discussing rather, Sirens of Titan by Kurt Vonnegut, which is his second book, and I'll be discussing it at length, probably greater length than this one. But yeah, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up if you feel so inclined, and I upload other bookish content on this channel every so often, not always about Vonnegut. Typically I read like YA or adult fantasy and contemporary and shit. If you'd like to see the other books that I discuss on my channel aside from Vonnegut, you are more than welcome to subscribe, as I upload pretty frequently and every so often. Leave me comments because talking to you guys is my favorite thing in the world. And yeah, like I said, my name is Morgan. This is MorgyyReads. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and happy reading. Okay, bye!